How to set default user for manually installed WSL distro. I have cloned a WSL distro using WSL export and WSL import, but now, running WSL new distro always logs me in as root. I understand that the lxrun command is deprecated and want to avoid it. The docs recommend using distroname.exe config, but that doesn't work, since this one doesn't have a corresponding executable.
The normal command syntax is for example. However, this does not work for an imported distro, which is started by the following command. Edit. Reports were made that the above now also works for imported distros. Try this undocumented method. Use regedit and navigate to the key hkey_current_user /software/Microsoft/Windows/current version/LXSS. Examine its subkeys for a distribution that has the right name in the item distribution name. Create or modify a dword item named defaultuit and set it to the user ID (UID) of your default user. Here root user is ID 0 while the first user ID is 1000, 0x3e8. If this does not work for your setup, you would need to run as. For more information see Export and import WSL Linux distro in Windows 10. Set default user for WSL in Windows 10.
If you are installing some custom distributions in WSL, you will not get a distroname.exe command to change the configuration. You may use xrunfline to change the default user. This toolset can be installed in Windows using choco install xrunfline. Get the default user ID of a distro. xrunfline allows you get and set the default user ID, UID, for any installed distributions. For instance, if you have a distro named new distro, you may check the default user using GU, get default user, and N with the name of the distribution. The command returns a number, the user ID of the default user. The root user has the 0 user ID. The default user created during the install has the 1000 user ID. Set the default user ID for a distro. If you want to set the root as the default user, you can make it using su set default user with N and the name of the distro, and V with the user ID, i.e., 0 for the root.
As of the time of this writing, there are at least 3, let's call it 3.5, different methods of setting the default user in an imported WSL instance. While the 2 that have already been mentioned still work, there is a Microsoft recommended way to do it that hasn't been mentioned yet in this question. Method 1, etc. WSL.conf. The current Microsoft recommended way of setting the username in an instance is to create a etc. WSL.conf in the instance with the following setting. Changing, of course, username to be your default username. Exit your distro instance, then issue a WSL, terminate from PowerShell or CMD. When you restart, the default user should be set. This is safer and less error-prone than the registry-based methods. Method 2, registry key. Setting the registry key per Haring's answer. Method 3, lxrofline. Using lxrofline to set the registry entry, as described in Jamie's answer. Ultimately, this has the same effect as method 2. Method 4, runtime user selection via WSL command line argument. The username can be selected when starting any WSL instance by WSL u username or WSL d distroname u username, etc. For instance, WSL d Ubuntu u root. Side note, this question was specifically about setting the default username in an imported instance. However, for completeness, you can also set the default username for a distro that was installed from the store, or WSL install with. For instance, if you installed Ubuntu 20.04 from the store, you would use. The .exe here is an app execution alias in Windows. You can check the name by going to Manage App Execution Aliases in the Windows System Settings. For readers who need to create a new user. Endemi made a good point in the comments last year that I, in hindsight, dismissed improperly. 2 other users have now mentioned in the comments that @ndemu's information was helpful. My belated apologies. Here's the additional information based on @ndemu's advice. Some users who find this answer may be starting up as root not because they imported a distribution, but possibly because the default user was never created during installation in the first place. This can happen when the distribution installation is stopped prematurely, and likely for other reasons as well. Under Ubuntu, the default distribution for WSL, you can create your user by starting with. If you need to, add the D option. Then run. Then set the user as the default using the etc. wsl.conf as mentioned above. If you've already created the user or are using a different distribution, as @ndemu points out, make sure to also add the user either to a group that is in sudoers or directly to sudoers via vsudo. See the answers to this question for additional details.
If you are using Windows Terminal, then you can configure a profile for your distribution. In the Profiles settings for Windows Terminal, select your distro's profile, then click the General tab, and under Command Line you can use one of the previously recommended options for the WSL command. For example, if you named your profile Ubuntu and your username is Bob, then you would set Command Line to wsl.exe dubuntu ubob. While you're at it, you can configure the starting directory, aka the one opened by default when you open a terminal for your distro with //wsl $distro /home /username. Using the previous example, for a distro named Ubuntu and a username of Bob, you would set starting directory to //wsl $ubuntu /home /bob.
If you want to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing.